Shalakaya Chakshurmalitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manupistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakaramayam Dadati Swavadantikam Namam Vishnupada Krishabhasta Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachayane Nivashesha Shunivari Pasachara Shatarine Vanchakapatu Visha Kripa Sanvevata Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shri Vasari Go Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you very much for coming to our first session on the topic of, yes, I've given it all different topics over the years. Let's say devotee care based on mentorship, or based on sheltering relationships. I have been a member of this devotee care committee in the GBC strategic planning. And for some time, this term devotee care was a whole big thing in ISKCON. Oh, we need devotee care. But many devotees actually don't so deeply understand what this involves. And people think, oh, when somebody is in the hospital and I bring them some prasadam, oh, I'm doing devotee care. Yes, all right, that's some little aspect of devotee care, but there's so much more to it. And the very foundation of devotee care should be sheltering relationships, that we have a mentor, that we accept guidance, that we have somebody where we can open our heart and we want to be corrected by this person. So care should be based on that. Otherwise, very easily, our attempts to care is rather a little material or emotional or sentimental, and in one sense we could say, well, why should we even care for people who don't accept guidance and shelter? Why should we? Because often people create a messy situation in their life because they don't take shelter and guidance. And then they come and say, oh, you're doing devotee care, can you help me fix this? So, but much better would be if people understand the importance of sheltering relationships, and then they can avoid themselves so many messy situations in life, So the whole seminar I usually give in Mayapur over 15 hours. Monday to Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. So we have only 2 times 45 minutes. So the first session, I want to try and convince you all that without having a mentor and eventually becoming one to others, we actually cannot make advancement. And then the tomorrow session, I want to jump to the 4th session in my seminar and discuss the qualities a person has to have in order to serve as a mentor, so that we know what to look for, right? And that we know what we should all develop ourselves also, so that one day we can also serve as a mentor. Yes, and I prepared some handouts there for you. Simply with handouts, it's easier to concentrate and listen, and for those who have a pen, well, you can take a few notes there along the side. So you can keep this. I don't need this back, So basically, let me introduce the topic by sharing this realization. I mean, here my audience is relatively young in Krishna consciousness, but those who've been around longer than 20 or 25 years, they may also have made this observation that so many people come to Krishna consciousness, they hang around for a while, but then they somehow fade away again, right? It's happening all over the world. And sometimes, I'm making this joke, but it's actually not a joke, it's serious. Sometimes when you return to a temple after 25 years not having been there, then the only personalities who you've seen before are their lordships on the altar. And all the other faces, well, they're all new faces, which is of course very nice. But then you scratch your head and think, well, where are all the faces from 25 years ago? Where are they? Right? Yes, and I have been several times in this situation where I was looking forward to meet all my old friends from the early days, and there was practically nobody around, you know. And I thought, oh, surely they will come on Janmashtami or when the gurus come. No, they were not around. And I really I couldn't stop thinking about this. What are we doing wrong? What is missing? That people don't want to stay in the fire of devotional life at the temple. Maybe they practice at home or something, but now, yeah, what's lacking? That people don't feel inspired their whole life long to be part of the community actively. So, and for me, this led me almost to the point where, yeah, I was not so fired up about outreach, because I was thinking to myself, what's the use of bringing all these people to Krishna consciousness? But then after 25 years, you don't meet them anymore, you know, yes. And I was thinking, yes, we have to turn more towards nourishing the devotees we have already, rather than always making new devotees, you know, because very often we come across this also from management point of view, that we think we don't have enough devotees to cover all the services. We need more devotees, outreach, 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 you know. But then when you look a little deeper, you realize actually there are so many devotees in the community, but they don't want to serve with heart and soul. They maybe do 5% of, you know, sacrifice, but not more than that. You know, and actually we have so many devotees, but yeah, they somehow are not inspired to come and serve, you know. And there is this famous letter, I forgot to bring my verse book, but maybe you've heard it also. This was in 1972 already, pretty early, where Prabhupada says, now we have so many devotees, you know, so let's not be too concerned in bringing more and more people, but let's boil the milk. You heard that term, boiling the milk? Yes. Let's boil the milk. Let's train our devotees always, ongoingly, you know, by discussing and hearing and make them deeper and sweeter, just like boiling the milk. You know, it becomes solid, sweet, and deep, you know. So, yeah. And Prabhupada said this in several occasions. He wrote this letter, all in 72. You know, so there, and then Prabhupada says, unless we boil the milk, very easily we may be adding water and thinning down the milk just to cheat the customers. You know, watering things down. Yes. So Prabhupada had that concern already in 72, you know. And that's definitely my mood, boiling the milk, you know. I also like to sometimes here and there do a bit of an outreach thing and so on. But boiling the milk, that's where it's at for me. And it also is more of a challenge to give something deeper to senior devotees, rather than somehow, impressing the newcomers or something. You have to come up with something more solid and deep to inspire the practicing devotees. Yes, so very clearly we have to understand the bhakti lata needs ongoing nourishment. Very often we think we are all really reaching out to people while they're not, joining yet. But then once a person joins, then, he's now one of our people. So, and then we expect and demand, rather than understanding that the bhakti lata needs ongoingly nourishment and care and ongoingly, yes, that we tend to forget, I mean, maybe I should quickly put this in a bit of a provocative story. Actually, Radhanath Swami tells this in a class, that, Radhanath Swami once spoke to a person who had been coming for many years to the temple, just Sunday program, So, and then he was speaking to him, trying to convince him to join. And then this person said a pretty shocking thing. He said, well, I watched how you deal with your visitors and how you deal with your own people. And I decided I want to stay in the visitors category. Yes. So, and there has been some, how do you say, people have, some outside people, professional outside people, they've been giving some feedbacks on the request of ISKCON. And they have also been saying this, you guys have the best food, the best philosophy, but how you deal with your people is not always so fantastic. So I think we have a bit of learning to do here, to care for our people, yes. I hope newcomers will not be discouraged to become part of the community. But it's a Radhanath Swami story. So let us get into a few points to try and establish the need for sheltering relationships, the need for this giving shelter and accepting shelter. It's actually a loving exchange. There's Guyam Akyati Puchati, there in the purport Prabhupada says, a more experienced devotee explains and a less experienced devotee learns from him. So that's giving and accepting shelter, Yes. So let us begin, and you've got the quote on your sheet, with a nice quote of or statement of Jiva Goswami, which he makes in the Madhava Mahotsava. There he says, though one usually ignores others in attaining one's goals, those aspiring for prema accept dependence on others with similar goals and tastes. Thus, cooperating with each other, they worked together, keeping in mind the goal of prema. So what's Jiva Goswami saying here? He's basically making this point that there's two kinds of people in this world. And that was already at his times, surprisingly. So he says, though one usually ignores others in attaining one's goals, those are obviously the materialists. You still have a sheet of paper for him? Or Or you can share it.
You can share.
Okay, good. Yes. So here he speaks about the materialist. That's the mood in materialistic society. That if you want to become successful, you ignore others, right? And you just work to achieve your own goals. But then those aspiring for prema, they act completely differently. They accept dependence on others, and of course here we talk about internal dependence, not financial dependence or something. Yes, just to make it clear. Yes, so internal dependence on others with similar goals and tastes, and they cooperate with each other, working together, keeping in mind the goal of prema. So, very different way of associating and different approach to aiming for your goals, right? Since we don't have so much time, I cannot allow myself to be interactive. Usually I take 3 hours for the session, with 10-15 minute break. Yes, so that leads us to this topic of clearly understanding the differences between how people, associate in materialistic culture and spiritual culture. So materialistic culture, meaning where sense gratification is the goal in life. So the relationships are characterized by the following. So as Jiva Goswami says, they ignore each other, but actually they do so much more than that, right? They push each other out of the way, step on each other's head to get up there. As we discussed Sunday on the Sunday Feast lecture, as soon as sense gratification is the goal in life, there will be competition and envy, right? Yes. And there's this mood of separatism, individualism, I'm all different, I'm cool, and this and that. And the higher standard of life usually leads to this illusory understanding of independence. We think our money makes us independent. Whereas in countries with a lower standard of life, people understand no relationships. That's the protection, not the money. You can have so much money, but especially in old age, all right, the money can pay a fancy retirement center, but you will be lonely. So the relationships is what protects and supports. Yes. Yeah, so, and because of all that, mainly the envy, competition, the relationships are actually superficial, external. They're based on let's enjoy together and let's enjoy each other. And if somebody else comes along who offers, a better enjoyment and is more convenient for us, then we go with that person, So the relationships are very interchangeable, Yes. And there's definitely not this mood of respect and service. Service? No, let's enjoy it, And whatever is more convenient for me goes, Yes. Yeah, so the basis is sense gratification. And another very clear aspect is, we are busy with our goals. There is selfishness there. No time for anybody else, busy, just focusing on my goals and my interests, Yes, because I want to get up there, right? So that makes the relationships rather impersonal, right? I like to call them Harry Bowl relationships. because this mood easily enters our communities, you know. Yes, because we are conditioned by this mood, you know, and this worldview, and you know, and often in temples you have this, oh, Haribol, nice to see you, Haribol, how are you? Yeah, oh, I'm running on the altar in the kitchen, I have my seva, Haribol, you know. Yes. Of course, at least we say Haribol, that's already something, and naturally we can't have deeper relationships with everyone around us, but at least with one or two people we should go beyond the Haribol, you know. Yes, otherwise it's a small talk, you know, if we leave it at that. So let's have a look in spiritual culture, how people relate to each other there. So as Jiva Goswami says, we accept internal dependence on those with similar goals and tastes, and we cooperate, you know, keeping in mind the goal of prema. We support each other, inspire each other, and yeah, so that's a whole different mood, you know, whole different mood. So there is respect there, there's the mood of service, there's humility there, you know, and it's a very natural exchange that the seniors who are more experienced, they affectionately reach out to the juniors and uplift them and guide them and help them, you know, very natural exchange. And those who are less experienced, you know, they inquire from the seniors and they want to serve, you know, and they accept this internal dependence, ask for guidance, you know. Yes. It's a very, very natural exchange, actually, you know, definitely within Vaishnava culture, you know. That's what the elders do. They reach out, they share their life experience, their wisdom, and you know, they show some interest. How are you doing? How can I uplift you? You know. So, and that makes the relationships deep and meaningful, right? Very often throughout our whole life, even if we don't always physically stay together in the same community or something, but then often we may meet a person again after some years, but there's immediately a connection there, and you know. Yeah, so a whole different way of relating, you know. So, and here in New York, the headquarters of Nirvishesha Shunyavadi, I like to compare it with Varanasi, you know, when Mahaprabhu was converting all the Mayavadis there by chanting the holy name, so Prabhupada came here and did the same thing, you know. Yeah, but it is heavily materialistic, you know, we are surrounded by this mood and we are conditioned by it. Yes. Oh, this conditioning is so subtle and so deep. Yes. We might think, oh, we make our own decisions, but no, we are just a product, you know, of our surroundings, of the culture and the mood around us, or the bombardments we are exposed to every day, you know, and we bring that into our communities, you know. Yes, so we can say, you know, when we come to Krishna consciousness, we may realize, no, sense gratification is not the foundation to our relationship. So let's kick that aspect out. But very often we don't replace it with giving and accepting shelter. And then there's some vacuum there, some emptiness, you know? You get my point? This is a really important part for community development, you know? And I'm coming across this so often on my travels, and I'm not speaking here about New York, but just in general, that very often I come to temples and I think, oh wow, such fantastic facility, this is great. You know, like in Europe we have all these castles, you know, from the early days, France, Italy, and so many beautiful places, Belgium, Bangladesh, you know. And you think, wow, fantastic, you know. But then when you stay a little longer, you see everybody's just running. And everybody sits in their rooms and then comes out, does the seva back in the room. And the atmosphere is really weird. And again, I'm not talking about any particular thing. So, and I've always been analyzing, what's missing here? Why is it such an impersonal mood? And then it dawned upon me, giving and accepting shoulder, that's missing. That's missing, you know? So we kick out the foundation to sense gratification to our relationships, but we are not replacing that foundation with giving and accepting shoulder. And therefore the relationships are so hollow and empty and vacuum and impersonal, you know? Yes. So, yeah. And we can almost say, and again, I'm a little provocative here, but it fits to what Radha Swami said in that little episode. You know, sometimes the non-devotees, they even deal nicer with each other than the devotees. Not because they're more advanced and selfless or what, but no, because they know if I'm not nice with the people around me, then I will not be able to enjoy with them. You know? And I mean, an example is when you go to a shop, oh, hello, good morning, how are you, what can I do for you? Of course, people are not selflessly your friend there, but they know if I'm nice to my customers, then they come back. You know, they will buy something. So that motivates them to be nice. But because we kick out this foundation of sense gratification, therefore we don't feel we have to be nice to each other, you know, because we're not interested in enjoying each other or with each other anyway. So, and then sometimes, God, you know, we behave like even non-devotees wouldn't behave with each other, you know. It's a bit of an issue, you know. So, yes, but what we have to do is we have to replace this foundation of sense gratification, you know, and being nice to each other with that, because of that, with giving and accepting shelter. You know, so if the seniors in a community affectionately reach out, they show some interest, how you're doing, and the juniors, they have respect, they want to serve the seniors, they inquire from them. Oh, that transforms the whole atmosphere in a community, right? Yes. But if this is not there, it just becomes so impersonal. And people just run, you know, busy, and ignore each other, you know, yes. And then communities, then usually people don't stay in this community. They will move on, right? Oh yes, and I know quite a few communities like that, where people come and people go, and it's a whole passing through thorough traffic there, you know. Yes, and we should ask ourselves, why aren't people staying? You know? Yes. And usually that's the reason. That's the reason, you know, that people just don't feel that somebody really has some interest in them as devotees. People may be interested in what service you can do and what holds to fill on the roster there. In Australia we have this term, devotees being roster fodder. Right, you understand? Fodder, what you feed to the animals, you know. roster fodder. So you feed devotees into the holds of the roster, treating them like roster fodder. Yes, this will not be attractive to devotees to give their heart and soul, right? If we treat devotees like roster fodder, they will do the minimum and what they want to do, and not more than that. Don't push me, you know? Yes, yes. But if we actually develop, you know, this aspect of devotee care based on sheltering relationships, then a community thrives, you know. Actually I'm very familiar with this whole topic because for over 20 years I've been preaching in Ukraine for some considerable time. And Narendra Swami really developed this devotee care in Ukraine. And I've seen how it brings not only stability to devotees' individual personal life, but also to communities. Devotees feel cared for because they have mentors, and they have somebody to reveal their heart, and you know, yes, and people want to serve, you know, yes. So here, Garuda Purana, we find the statement: one cannot be liberated without the association of pure devotees of the Lord. So we know that. And then second statement is, and unless one shows mercy to those in an inferior position, one's life will be superficial. Right? So that very clearly makes this point, that unless sooner or later we get to this point where we want to reach out to those who are less experienced and we serve as a mentor, our life will be superficial because we only think of ourselves and my interest and my thing, you know. Yes. And not only our life will be superficial, but our relationships. It will just be small talk, Haribo relationships, you know, and nothing much more than that, you know, yes. Yes, also a few more points trying to convince you of this importance of mentorship and sheltering relationships. You know, as we go through life, we face always new challenges. Life is full of challenges, by the way, for those who are pretty young here. Full of challenges. So, and unless we have at least one sheltering relationship in our life, we may not pass these challenges and tests in a good way, you know. Let's imagine, you know, some young fellow joins the ashram, wants to be a brahmachari. Okay, wow, what a challenge. Then maybe after a few years he realizes, well, it's not lifelong for me, maybe I should move on to the next ashram, get married. Wow, another new challenge. So then he becomes a father. Oh my God, another new challenge. You know, so then the kids become teenagers. Oh my God, another new challenge. So, and then after the Grihastha ashram, there should be another ashram, the Vanaprastha ashram, which nobody even talks about it. But it is there in the Bhagavatam, and very natural also. So then Vanaprastha ashram, another new challenge, right? So there's always so many challenges. So it's actually the most natural, common sense thing that when we approach these new challenges, we ask for guidance of those who have already more experience facing these new challenges, right? With common sense. And yet we usually don't do it. In fact, we could save ourselves so many miseries and troubles if we would just take guidance before we make a decision, rather than making our own decisions and then we go to guru or senior devotee, oh, please give me your blessings. What is that? You know, we cheat ourselves. The true blessings come when we ask for guidance before we make a decision. You know, but once we made our decision, even a guru sees actually, oh my God, this is not a good idea. But what can he do? You already decided. You know, no way to talk you out of it. So then he says, okay, do it. Oh, my guru gave me his blessings. You know? Oh yeah, it happens all the time. I have quite a few stories, but we don't have time for this. Yeah, so we could save ourselves so many problems. You know? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also makes quite a few powerful statements. Here is one where he says, I wish that every selfless, tender-hearted person of the Gaudiya Math will be prepared to shed 2 gallons of blood for the nourishment of the spiritual corpus of every individual of this world. Wow, 2 gallons of blood it costs. 200, thank you. 200 gallons of blood. 200 gallons, not liters, gallons. To just nourish one devotee. So he, becomes a pure devotee. It requires a sacrifice. And obviously, not the Diksha Guru alone can shed that blood. Otherwise, he would be anemic very quickly. So it's to be expected that others also, donate a few drops of blood. Yes. Yeah, so it's such an important topic. And actually it's very, very practical also, even within a family. Let's say, a family has 15 children, which was not so unusual in the former times. In the agrarian setting, the children were valuable helpers, to bring in the harvest and all that. So family with 15 children, obviously the older children will take care of the younger children. They help, right? Because the parents can't extend themselves equally to all 15 children. So it's a very natural thing, And same thing there also in a family with hundreds and thousands of children. So it's common sense that those who are more experienced, they reach out to the others and help, And there is another powerful statement, I'm jumping a little here, in Amrita Bani, in the book by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I actually put it on the back of this book, which discusses the whole topic. There it says, one who gives personal instruction to each and everyone does more for others than the platform speakers do. So I'm a platform speaker here, sitting on the platform of a chair. Generally, whatever platform speakers say cannot solve the problem of everyone in the audience, nor can it always benefit every individual. And now it comes. A person's defects are better rectified in a private tutorial class or private coaching than in hearing lectures in a school or college. Therefore, those who instruct particular persons separately can award them something more permanent. Wow, powerful. Huh? I mean, when I came across this quote, I was dancing in ecstasy. Oh, here it is, black and white. Bhaktisiddhanta says it. And I feel we haven't clearly understood this. We always measure our preaching and, oh, how many people attended, or 200-300, oh, wow. But the one-to-one, the person who gives the one-to-one offers something more permanent. Yes, because the defects usually in us are rectified like that. You can go on forever listening to nice leaders in classes and saying this. I don't want to minimize the leaders in classes, but if this is all we do, we can very nicely maintain all our false ego patterns of behaviors and whatnot, And if we don't have somebody who points it out and says, hey, you have to cool down a bit and don't, show off and all this. We need a person to point it out to us, yes. Yeah, so it's a big story. And just for your interest, Bharat Maharaj in the Bhagavatam, his problem was he didn't have a mentor. Yes. He was all alone there in the forest. Story started with all good intentions to help this poor deer and but then he just got so entangled. When you read it in the Bhagavatam, how he was sleeping with the deer on his chest and him hugging and kissing, and my God, you really think he went a little nutty, Yes, so he didn't have anybody who can tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, it's enough. Let the deer be deer and get back to your sadhana. Yes. And Bharat Maharaj was on the level of bhava, very advanced level, with transcendental emotions. And even there, these transcendental emotions can turn back into material attachments. Wow, yes. So no matter on which level of advancement we may be, we need these relationships. We should want them. Yes. We should desire them. Yes. So this is a big warning. Because often for young devotees, everybody thinks, oh yeah, sure, they need somebody to guide them. But actually, the more senior we become, the more load we carry. And, remembering the porters at the train stations in India, that carry 5 suitcases on their heads. So you only have to, hit them a bit and boo, everything falls, So the bigger weight you carry, the more you need to be sheltered by somebody who carries even a bigger weight and is well balanced. But very often we see, that senior devotees may not have anybody in their life who can tell them something. Yes, who can correct them. Yeah, and that's a risky position. Yes, yesterday I mentioned I'm with the 3rd Diksha Guru. So all these wonderful personalities in ISKCON who could not maintain their position as sannyasi or guru had that in common. They did not have sheltering relationships. Yes, because very often these things can be caught early, that we may be going and having some little discrepancies here, and it starts all tiny and unnoticeable, and then whoops, after a while, you're all over there, and you don't even notice. Our practice becomes imbalanced, and nobody can tell us. Yes. Risky life. And also let us very quickly remember, this is the main contributions of the Brahmanas. They are meant to play this role of being an aloof Brahminical advisor to the kings, like Chanakya Pandit, yes. Because being a king, there's always some material attachment coming. As long as we have material desires and attachments, and I think we all do, our vision of ourselves is clouded. We cannot objectively assess ourselves. That's the principle, So, therefore, not only the kings need an aloof Brahminical advisor, but we all do. Yes. Because we may be thinking we're doing really well, but others may have a different idea, Yes. And also others may see that we stay in our comfort zone and therefore we become stagnant. So that's why we need somebody to tell us, hey, why don't you move forward? Adjust this thing, that thing, kick that out of your life, introduce that thing, and then you can move forward. But we like to stay in our comfort zone. It's only human, And if we don't have that person to point it out, then very easily we can come to the temple for 30 years every year to the Sunday program and nothing much happens in our life because we are stagnant, Yes. And I mean, this is not only for people who live outside the temple. I dare say even living in the ashrams it can go like that, that we just stick with the same thing, okay, for many years, but we're not moving forward somehow, And this is this thing, how to move forward. It's a very individual thing. We can't push everybody through the same hole here or something. It has to be given very individually because we're all on a different level. We carry different baggage. We carry different attachments. Very individually, personally, that guidance has to be given, So very quickly, last few minutes, I do want to use to define a little bit more what actually is a sheltering relationship. We've talked about it a fair bit. So just to make it more clear. So a mentor should be a senior, confidential friend and well-wisher. And actually, he gives inspiration, he's a role model, he gives guidance, and his only interest should be our spiritual development. No other interest, absolutely none. Only my spiritual growth and my spiritual journey. That should be his interest. If we have such a person in our life, we are blessed. That's actually what it means to get the mercy of a Vaishnava, to somehow get his interest in our spiritual journey. So there should be no emotional interest, no financial interest, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, even no managerial interest. Because very often, going back to the roster fodder, we see people in terms of management. And this is only natural for a manager, that's his job, to make ends meet. I've been for many years in management, I know what a challenge it is, But that's why we need, apart from the authority of a manager, we need also somebody who is not a manager in our lives, Yes, because very easily the managerial interests clash with the individual interest of a devotee, very easily, And that brings us to the point that actually devotee care is all about becoming people-focused rather than project-focused. Right? Big topic. I mean, as I said, I spend 15 hours on this topic usually, so I'm just trying to give you some glimpses here what the whole topic is all about and how serious this topic is. And all I can say is please get the book. There you get it all in compact form and more detailed, even more detailed than in the seminar actually, Yeah, so it's a whole big topic, because very easily we are just too project focused, and only think what's the project need, And yeah, I mean, let me share this. For many years, people were sometimes complaining to me that they feel used or something, and I could never relate to it. I thought, well, what's the problem? You're serving Krishna, what's the problem of being used? But then, after some time, it dawned upon me why people sometimes feel used. And it is actually, the point is that we can't blame the managers because they're playing their role. No, we can only blame ourselves that we don't have this sheltering relationship in our life, where we fully trust this person has no other interest, and yes, and then, if we feel somehow we are overburdened with service, because usually it's like that, those people who surrender and do things, they are loaded with service, and then sometimes our life becomes imbalanced and we actually need a break. But then, the manager may say, sorry, you can't go to India, otherwise my whole Sankirtan department falls apart, or the DD department falls apart. But then we can go to our mentor and say, please, can you speak to the manager? I need a break. I need some nourishment. I'm almost near the burnout or whatever, So, and then the mentor can speak to the, manager and appeal to him and so on and so on, Yes. Yeah, so should have no other interest except my spiritual journey. And another really important point of a sheltering relationship is that we want to be corrected by this person. Yes. Because how often are we corrected and we don't like it, who are you to say, false ego rebels, so, but from this person, because we know he's got no, or she's got no other interest except helping me in my journey. So there we happily accept the correction, even if it's a little painful touching on false ego. But yeah, it's actually then correction becomes a loving exchange. But from that, because from that person you accept it, that person has only your interest in mind, and from that person you're happy to accept. And you allow that person to touch upon very sensitive points in your heart, which you would not so easily allow just anybody to touch. But that person you allow. You want it. And then correction becomes actually a very personal, sweet and deep loving exchange. Yes. Yeah, so and of course very important is that this is a trusting relationship. There is confidentiality. We touched upon it yesterday when talking about Pujaba. There has to be confidentiality, otherwise people, how can they open up their heart? If they have this fear, everybody will hear, and the whole ashram, the whole temple knows what I'm going through, There has to be confidentiality, And then we can open up, And this relationship has to be established before a calamity and challenge hits, Because otherwise, if you're stuck in some challenge and some issues and, maybe you can't follow the principles or whatever it may be, if there's not this relationship already established, then to go to somebody will be very difficult, then the false ego comes in between, and oh, what they think of me, and oh, and this and that, and how can I tell them, and. But if the relationship is established, then very naturally you will run to this person and reveal your heart and ask for some guidance and some instructions, you know. Yeah, so that's in very brief, you know, in a nutshell, you know, the essence of this first session. 1:05.
It's okay.
See, that's why I wanted it at 12 and not 12:30. So, do we have any questions? Yes, Paul.
Oh, I was thinking about this point, and it's on the individual and not the manager. So maybe you could speak about that, because I was just thinking, thought that was coming to my mind was, wouldn't it be also the management's responsibilities to make sure that those people are actively seeking for a mentor, because they may not know.
That's right. And most managers also don't know. That's the problem. That's why I wrote a whole book about it, you know. Yes. So it should be the managers, you know, who help to facilitate such a structure. And as I said, my experience goes back over 20 years to Ukraine. When Narendra Swami introduced it there, many of the temple presidents, they didn't like it. You know? Yes, they felt threatened in their, sorry to say, control over people, you know. Well, being a manager, you have to control somehow, otherwise you have some chaos there, you know. Yes. Yeah, you have to control. So he needs control. So yeah, many TPs, they were not so keen to share their control, you know. But then, you know, Narendra Swami, for many years, he convinced them, and they realized that actually their job becomes so much easier if people have a mentor, you know. Then they don't have to deal with all these things that come up in people's lives and all this and that. So go to your mentor, talk to him. But obviously the relationship between the TP or the managers and the mentors has to be really good. You know, they have to have good, deep, affectionate relationships, that they pull in the same direction and that they want the whole community to thrive and you know, yes. But also my experience is that unless some very senior devotees, ideally GBCs, gurus, really support, if not promote this, not easy to introduce. Yes, not easy. Yeah. Yes. Yes, because we are so conditioned by this materialistic worldview of ignoring others and being the self-made man or woman, and you know, just, yes, it's such a deep conditioning, you know. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, the two aspects of community development are that the deities have to be the center, and everybody, as far as possible, has some connection with some little service to the deities. Then you get Vaikuntha atmosphere, you know. But second one is sheltering relationships. Because the Lord will say, okay, you serve me so nicely, but what about my devotees? You know, they're suffering, they're neglected, they're not cared for, you know. And Krishna is more pleased if his devotees are served and cared for than having all these fancy offerings or something. You know, yes, the devotees are so dear to Krishna, you know, yes. That if we serve and care for them, this really pleases the Lord, you know, yes. So they are the two main principles for community development: deity worship and sheltering relationships, mentorship, you know. What else? So that's why I'm glad you're here. You know, because in some temples I have given these seminars, but none of the leaders and managers are even there to hear it. You know, and only the young devotees are there. You know, so yeah, just the fact that you're here gives me some hope.
Was also a young devotee.
Huh?
He's not old yet.
I just came to the door yesterday.
But he serves as one of the
Yeah, I know.
managers. Yeah, no, it's often really like that. It's up to the next generation of managers. You know, often the first generation, as Prabhupada was saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You know, it's often harder to introduce it, but if the next generation, you know, yeah, they can move things forward. You know. What else? Did you listen online or did
We
you?
were trying to, a book order came in at the worst time, and so we were just loading everything, and we had it on the speaker, but I don't know. But I was thinking something yesterday, and maybe you already said something about it today, but perhaps a little bit about the relationship between devotees living at the temple and the congregation, and how to make that strong, because sometimes I feel like it's a little bit disconnected. Oh, they just come and
Yeah.
make a donation or do a little
Yes.
something there, and there's not really a relationship.
Yes, yes. It's a bit off the topic, but it's in many temples like that. And very often also in those temples where there is a strong brahmachari ashram, because then everybody concentrates on that, you know, and the congregation is almost left alone or something, you know. So again, sheltering relationships, you know. So if the congregation also has this mentorship structure and so on, then that is good. And I mean, if you read the whole book, I'm very practically telling how to start, you know. Yes. It's like a handbook to start it, but you have to start it, you know. Yes. So basically the idea is, in a nutshell, that of course everybody takes a mentor from their own ashram. So, and then the possible mentors, they meet regularly in a sangha. To begin with, every week they have a 90-minute sangha and they build their relationships. So in that way, you know, the bridges are built on the top. Then the senior devotees from the congregation who are responsible and seriously practicing, they have regular sanghas with your brahmachari mentors and you know. So, and then once the relationships are built, many people will drop out. You may start with 20 people and you may be left with 5 or 6. People say, oh, sorry, I haven't got the time to attend a weekly sangha. Oh, well, then you're not going to have the time to be a mentor either. Because to be a mentor takes more than 90 minutes a week. You know, yes. So it's a good sifting process, and then you're left with those who take it seriously. And by then the relationships are built. You know, there cannot be any competitive relationships and working against each other. You know, if the mentors work against the managers, that will not be a good idea, you know. So it should not be a system for political parties and independent leaders who want their followers or something. So first the relationships have to be built. So, and then they start their own home programs. So, you know, the mentorship idea is based on regular sanghas. It's not a matter of just making a poster and saying, here, these are the mentors. If you have some problem, you can ring them or something. That's completely artificial. No. Every mentor then starts a weekly sangha, and the sangha amongst the mentors moves on to every 2 weeks. So both kind of sanghas go on parallel, you know. So, and then very natural, if people see, oh, my mentor has such nice relationships there with the temple managers and the brahmacharis, mentors. So then that filters down through the whole community, you know. It would be, this whole idea would be fantastic for communities like Mayapur, where you have so many different nationalities and they're all sitting in their corners there. You know, if the mentors of all these different nationalities meet, you know, then the bridge is built on the top level, you know. But if it always filters down from the top, you know, yeah, like that, it goes on, you know. And I mean, that's one point. But of course also, I don't know what it's like here, but in some places the brahmacharis also go out and have programs in the householders' homes, you know. Yes, yes. But here in the West, people may be afraid to get, you know, to get somehow contaminated or something by going to people's homes and so on, you know. But at least in Indian families, you know, usually the women know how to behave nicely, dress nicely, so I don't think it's such a threat for a brahmachari to go out and have a program with them or something. So traditionally, that is actually one of the roles of the brahmacharis, to go out and uplift the grihasthas, you know. Yeah, they're the sadhus, you know. In Bangladesh, I have witnessed all these things. By the way, before I forget, why don't you come for a visit to Bangladesh with some of you brahmacharis?
Yeah, we want to.
I could truck a holy name.
That's
The
not
Anchor truck is
Bangladesh.
Bengal.
Yes. No, but a trip to Bangladesh. I can arrange it all for you. It's a different planet. Yes. You will be amazed what nectar is flowing there. It's paradise for brahmacharis. We have hundreds of brahmacharis in Bangladesh. Hundreds.
My guy brother recently came like a year or two ago, Nityananda Kishore, from the Dhaka temple. So he was saying, oh yeah, you come anytime, we can arrange a full.
Yes. Yes. Oh yes. It's fun. Bangladesh is a lot of fun and joy and so much affectionate dealings and you know, it's a whole different atmosphere there. You know? Then you realize how dry we are here in the West and how, you know, we are all traumatized by lusty experiences and we all, you know, having these walls around ourselves and all that. So in Bangladesh you don't have that. You know, Vaishnav culture is full of sweetness and beauty. You have to experience it at least once in your life, you know, how it is all meant to be lived. It's the culture of this built world, you know. Do we have anything else? All right, so maybe we'll leave it at that. So please come back tomorrow, 12 o'clock, same time, same place, and we'll go, you know, through the qualities we need to have to be a mentor, you know, so we know what to look for and we know what to eventually cultivate. And yes. Okay, thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki Go Premanandi.
Yeah, I think you know to appreciate the class. I think you know to